All right, today we're going to talk about the deepest story there is, the story of us. But what if I told you that the version of history we all learned in school, that neat, tidy timeline of progress, might be completely wrong? What if our past is far older and far more mysterious than we ever imagined?
It all boils down to this one simple question. How did it all start? We have an answer that we're all familiar with, right? It feels like this straightforward climb, a ladder of progress from caves to skyscrapers.
And here it is. This is the story we're all told. First, we were nomads, hunting and gathering. Then, boom, we discovered farming. That gave us a surplus of food, which let some people stop farming and become artisans or priests. And that led directly to cities, writing, civilization, the whole shebang. It's a nice, simple story. The only problem? It looks like it isn't true.
When you actually look at the hard evidence, like ancient skeletons, a really surprising picture emerges. Hunter-gatherers? They were generally taller, healthier, and ate a much more varied diet. Early farmers, on the other hand, worked way harder, ate repetitive grains, and lived crammed together, which, is a perfect recipe for disease. So you have to ask, why on earth would anyone voluntarily sign up for that deal?
This quote from historian Yuval Noah Harari just nails the paradox perfectly. It completely flips the script. The move to farming wasn't this big promotion for humanity. For the average person, it was kind of a trap. It meant more work, worse health, and it locked us into this endless cycle of labor just to keep everyone fed. So that's our first huge mystery.
So keeping that mystery in mind, let's turn to our first major clue. And this is a big one. It's a discovery that it completely shatters that simple, linear story we were just talking about.
In modern-day Turkey, there's a place called Göbekli Tepe, and its age is just staggering. We're talking 11,600 years old.
Now, to really let that sink in, this site is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It's more than twice as old as the Great Pyramid of Giza. This comes from a time when, according to the official story, we were all supposed to be simple nomadic hunter-gatherers.
And here's why Göbekli Tepe is such a game changer. It was built by people who hadn't even invented farming yet. They were quarrying, moving, and carving these absolutely massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 10 tons. And they did it all without metal tools or even pottery. This turns the old story on its head. It suggests that complex religion, massive construction projects, and social organization didn't happen because of agriculture. It looks like they happened before. Something else was driving our ancestors.
So if a site like Göbekli Tepe shows a level of sophistication we thought was impossible for that time, you have to wonder, what else are we missing? And this leads us to a really radical new theory about our past, the idea of a civilizational reset, an idea that we were knocked back into the Stone Age by a global catastrophe.
The prime suspect for this catastrophe is called the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis. Now, that sounds complicated, but the idea is pretty simple. Around 12,800 years ago, evidence from all over the world suggests that a comet, or fragments of a comet, slammed into the Earth. We're talking microscopic diamonds, melted glass, stuff that only forms under insane heat and pressure. This wasn't a slow climate shift. It was a violent planetary shock.
And that impact event is thought to have massively accelerated the melting of the giant ice sheets that still covered huge parts of the globe. This kicked off a period of catastrophic flooding on a scale that is it's hard to even comprehend.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around this number. 120 meters. That is almost 400 feet. Entire coastlines, the very places our ancestors would have loved to live, they didn't just flood. They completely vanished beneath the waves.
Which, of course, brings us to the most obvious question. If there were advanced societies before this cataclysm, where did they go? Where's the evidence? And the answer might be as simple as it is daunting. It's underwater.
You can see just how devastating this 1-2 punch would have been. First, the climate collapse itself would have wiped out food sources and caused populations to plummet. Then, the rising seas would have swallowed up the most fertile, resource-rich lands on the planet. Any survivors would have been scattered refugees, forced to move inland, while their entire world was literally drowned behind them.
So let's look at a prime candidate for one of these lost worlds. Before about 8,000 years ago, the Persian Gulf as we know it didn't exist. It was a huge, fertile river valley, an oasis about the size of Great Britain, fed by 4 major rivers. It would have been an absolute paradise for people to live for tens of thousands of years. Today, it's completely gone.
Now here's where the puzzle pieces start to click into place.
Right as that Gulf oasis vanishes beneath the waves for good, a brand new, surprisingly sophisticated culture called the Ubaid suddenly appears in Mesopotamia, with no obvious local history. They show up with permanent houses, long-distance trade, domesticated animals, the whole package. The timing is just too perfect to be a coincidence. It strongly suggests they were the survivors, the refugees, from that drowned oasis, carrying the seeds of civilization with them.
So let's pull back and look at the big picture here. This evidence isn't just about rocks and old pottery. It's about fundamentally changing our whole philosophy of human history.
You know, the idea that history isn't just a straight line of progress isn't even that new. Over 600 years ago, the incredible scholar Ibn Khaldun noticed that civilizations move in cycles. They rise, they flourish, they get comfortable, and then they collapse, making way for the next one. Maybe that pattern goes back way further than we ever dreamed.
And this is really what it all comes down to. We have two competing stories of humanity. Are we the result of one single, unbroken climb to the top, or is our history a much more epic, much more dramatic story of reaching incredible heights, suffering devastating falls, and the struggle of the survivors to rebuild over and over and over again?
And finally, think about this for a second. Almost every single culture on Earth has an ancient story about a great, world-ending flood. We're talking Noah's Ark, the Epic of Gilgamesh, countless indigenous traditions from every corner of the globe. What if these aren't just stories? What if they are the distant, fragmented memories of a very real event, the drowning of the world that our ancestors once knew?
This new story of humanity suggests our past is far grander, more tragic, and way more mysterious than we've ever been led to believe. And it leaves us with this one profound question. If a potential cradle of civilization is lying right now under the Persian Gulf, what other forgotten worlds and what other lost chapters of our own story are still out there, just waiting to be discovered under the waves?